Good evening. Labour all across Canada is going to have a tough year, I suspect. But what's going to happen in BC with a new government, new Labour minister, and who knows what changes to Labour Code? Maybe we'll find out. But first, here's Ted with the rundown.
Canadians are being taxed to prepare for war whether we like it or not. Dr. Jerilynn Prior, a Quaker, is prepared to go to jail to protest the spending of her taxes on defense. She's coming up with Webster. BC is struggling to regain lost ground following last year's 4.5-month IWA strike and the 15% tax. Tonight on Webster, two spokesmen from the backbone of the forest industry, the Truck Loggers Association. But first, do labor relations in BC need improving? British Columbians are being asked for their ideas on the subject by the provincial government. Webster talks with the new man in charge, MLA Lyall Hanson, Minister of Labour and Consumer Services.
Welcome to the Webster Show.
Thank you, Jack.
First time we've been on the air together, and you are the Mayor of Vernon.
That's right.
You've got a tough job because Mr. Van der Zalm, your Premier, has promised that by February 28th, you're going to review the Labour Code, all Labour legislation, and set a new climate.
That's a tough job, but that's the mandate the Premier's given me.
I'll tell you one of the things that the Labour unions are worried about. It's about some remarks made by the Premier before he was elected, but since he's talked about it since, that it might be desirable to decertify all unions with fewer than 50 members, which would effectively wipe out the vast bulk of certifications in BC. Have you got a mandate to look at that in your amendments to the Labour Code?
Well, Jack, I wasn't privy to that remark that you attribute to the Premier, and I'm sure it's correct. I have a mandate to review the total code, and included in that are various organizations, depending on how large, small, they're all encompassing. The review is all encompassing.
Do you happen to think that it's too easy for unions to become certified in British Columbia?
Well, as you know, that we put out a request for submissions from people, and that's a very popular opinion in the numbers of submissions that I've received. I haven't formed a personal opinion on it.
But you'll be expecting some propositions along that line.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I'll give you another one that you may already have received. Do you anticipate that you might consider making it easier for a union, for a company rather, to become a non-union company after it has perhaps failed as a unionized company?
That will be considered in the review, Jack. I've had a number of submissions on both the certification process and the decertification process, and I've had, quite frankly, a number of very innovative ideas as to how it should be dealt with.
But you know how it works in Alberta, the famous Pocklington case, whereby when the contract ended, he was able to say, I think, you can start work again tomorrow, $4 an hour or $3 an hour less. And of course the strike came and all that great kerfuffle. Do you think that might be the way that the British Columbia Labour Code will go?
Well, it's a possibility, Jack. The Labour Review in Alberta is dealing with that, and as a matter of fact, part of the review process is going to Alberta to see what they have come up with in their review. But that situation that existed with Pocklington is not allowed under our Labour Code in British Columbia. The situation here is that if a contract expires, the terms of that contract that expired are still in effect until a new contract is written.
There was one decision by the Labour Board against that, but I believe the courts corrected that situation.
The courts turned it over.
That would certainly make it easier, because I had a case today where a union member who owned a small company is no longer allowed to work for his own company because he was expelled from the union because he had gone to non-union wages and conditions. Now, do you think that man was right, and should he be allowed to work for his own company?
Under the current legislation, he's not allowed to work for his own company if he is a certified
A union contractor.
Right.
And also at the same time, he can't even certify a new company. What would happen if he started a new company right now, all non-union, under the present code?
The union would certify it again. He would almost automatically. I would think that the Labour Relations Board, and I don't want to prejudge a decision coming from them, but their pattern has been that his new company that he started would be considered a method of avoiding unionization, and he would be certified.
And that, of course, is what prevents many contractors from to put it, I think they call it in the trade, double-breasting.
That's right.
Having a union company, it goes under because it can't compete. It cannot start a new company under the legislation at the moment.
That is correct.
Non-union.
That's correct.
You yourself...
You would be amazed at how many submissions I've had exactly on that subject, and mostly to do with the construction industry.
Yeah, that would become explosive, though, would it not? Or do you feel that the appearance of a strong non-union factor, as in Kirchhoff, etc., is a step in the right direction for the economic and industrial health of British Columbia?
Well, Jack, I think that you mentioned the Kirchhoff construction thing, and there's no question that he has been able to accomplish what he has because of the economic times. I'm not sure of the conditions of employment that he has. I've had an awful lot of submissions relating to the fact that there should be a Fair Wage Act in British Columbia. As a matter of fact, there is provision for it in the current legislation, but it has never been enacted because of the difficulties in setting what the fair wage should be. But I've had an awful lot of representation from the unionized construction industry.
Would you give me a personal opinion on that one? Are you inclined to go along that way to prevent a union contractor having to, say, bid on $27 an hour benefits or 24 or whatever it is, while the non-union can bid on 18 or 16, undercut and cream the cost of the contract?
Would I personally be inclined?
Yeah.
Well, I can't answer that, Jack, because it would be prejudging what we are going to come up with in the review. But I certainly would agree that there is a great difficulty in the situation as it exists now.
You're not inexperienced in labour matters because as Mayor of Vernon you had some tough ones, did you not?
Well, I negotiated a few contracts with our CUPE local. But I have to say to you that the situation as it exists within the construction industry is it has a number of unique problems that don't relate to the relationship of, say, CUPE and the city of Vernon.
Feather bedding, for instance.
Yes, that's a real...
Now, would you regard yourself as in the right of the spectrum, or would you call yourself a middle-of-the-roader in labour matters?
I'm a middle-of-the-roader. Yeah, I don't think there's any question of that.
Well, here's something that might please both sides. I am told that the Labour Relations Board and all its panoply of experts has become a veritable feeding trough for lawyers, and that it's now impossible for the best union in the world to go to the Labour Board without an expensive lawyer. Everything is turned into a legalized nightmare. Can you straighten that up at all?
Well, as I said, Jack, the review is all-encompassing, and you know, I quite honestly, it would be very difficult to pick on one professional segment of our society to say that. But I have to also say to you that a number of the briefs that I've received at this point, and very simplistically, they say, get rid of the legal profession and labor will be, all your problems will be solved. But that's
not. When do you start your tour?
I start my tour on Monday in January the 19th in Nelson.
And finish it?
February the 7th in Abbotsford.
And cover the whole province in the meantime?
Yeah, it's too bad that there are a number of centers that we can't visit, but as you realize, you know, February the 28th is coming up on us, and the response that I'm getting to these different locations, I showed you earlier what we've already scheduled for Nelson.
Oh, it's incredible. Anyone who wants to appear in front of you should contact the Employment Standards Branch Office in your ministry, anywhere in the province.
And they can phone any labor ministry and find out from them the particular phone number in their location that's closest to them.
Well, I want you to take some calls tonight. We'll see if we can raise some interest on changes that people want or don't want to the Labour Code after the break. I forgot to mention that Lyall Hanson, the Minister of Labour, is also the Minister of Consumer Affairs.
Consumer Affairs, correct.
Well, you've downgraded that department now to a mere shadow of its former powerful self, have you not?
I don't know. I'm not sure what you're alluding to.
Well, all the enforcement branch and all the little bits and pieces we had before. Now you've got half the branch and somebody else has got the other half.
Oh, I see, yeah. Well, they were split. When the Premier reorganized the Cabinet, the Consumer Affairs was sent to me and the Corporate Affairs went to
Let's see
the
what
Minister.
people might have to tell you about the Labour Code, if anything. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering whether there's going to be any protection at all to the unionized sector. The case that I'm thinking of is I'm a unionized mill worker, do cabinet making and that type of thing. And the Labor Board has just ruled that non-union companies can put their non-union product on a union site. So basically what's happening to us is the union people cannot put their product on a non-union site because of the labor disputes and hassles, etc. And now the non-union can put their product on a union site. So actually our unionized sector in millwork is pretty well redundant.
I don't quite understand that. What do you mean on a site? In your plant?
Well, like a place like Metrotown, all the millwork and all the stores in there would be, pardon me, all the work in a site like that is a union site. All the work would be unionized. But the millwork that is going in there is allowed to be non-union as long as it's installed by a union contractor.
Well, the unions have agreed to that, though, have they not?
No, not really.
Okay.
Lost it to the Labor Board.
Okay.
Well, I know of no decision to that effect, Jack, that has changed anything significantly in the last week or two.
Go ahead, please.
Yes.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
A question to Mr. Hanson regarding employers in British Columbia. I was in an awkward situation of being disabled through a motor vehicle accident, and although I would be able to perform some functions at my job and hopefully gradually reintegrate myself into work, my employer took the position of we're not running some kind of a rehab workshop for injured workers, and I just wasn't allowed to return to my job. It was like, come back when you're 100%. I'd like to ask the minister whether or not there's been some briefs or he would be considering some changes to the labor code to actually require an employer to consider allowing an employee who wishes to get back to work to who may have some minor limitations to.
Okay, question?
Well, I think that we, again, the review will be including everything. I don't know the circumstances of this gentleman's particular problem, but we do have people in the ministry who advise people of their rights and so on under a circumstance like that. I would have to listen to his whole story and the reasons behind it.
Go ahead from Parksville.
Yes, I was wondering if there's any way that they could make a mandatory 6-month probation period that you had to live in the province before you could get a job here. I'm sick and tired of half the jobs I've been working on, guys from Ontario coming in, stepping right on the job, working 6 months, 8 months construction, iron workers and steel workers and operating engineers, and then going down east to Ontario and collect unemployment insurance and pretty well taking our jobs away just by telling one of their buddies to come out here.
Who lets them in? Your own union?
Union and non-union jobs.
Mr. Hanson?
Well, I think that would be very difficult to legislate against, Jack, because there are a flow of workers across the Canadian...
The flow's the other way just now. They've only got 4.2% unemployment in Toronto, and we got 12.9.
But, as times change and conditions change, the flow could be the other way, and that would be a very difficult thing, not only to regulate, but to democratically provide
in a free
legislation.
country. Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I would like to know what this thing within, let's say, the BC government with their postings, this in-service thing is, and why they have that. And I think that it's unfair that as me, I'm unemployed and I'm looking for a job, and they got these postings, which I feel I'm qualified for, but they're all in service and they're just unionized, and I think that stinks, really.
You're talking about the BCGE's monopoly on the first bite at any jobs in the government.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, that's a contract that the provincial government signed with the BCGEU, giving rights to seniority, and those people who have built in-service seniority within the government have the right as within that contract to bid first.
And you think that's okay?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily is okay. It's an agreement that we have made, and it's a contract we have to live up to. It will be part of the review process, though.
Yeah, I would like to see that reviewed. I find that's unfair,
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack, I would like to ask Mr. Hanson, in his submission or in his brief, how much consultation with the BC Federation of Labor has there been or will there be?
Well, I have already had a meeting with the president of the BC Fed, but it's my understanding that we are arranging a meeting with the BC Fed for a presentation of their brief and their submission as to changes they see would be most appropriate within the code.
They'll be there as anybody
absolutely.
else, and they'll get as
They're a
much time.
very, very high-profile, large segment of organized labor in the province, and
Thank
we
you.
must.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster. I've got a question for your
Guest.
guest. You know, there's quite a bit of employment in the construction industry in BC at the moment,
50%.
but some of the workers are working 60 hours or more, and others aren't working any. Does our guest feel that that's fair? There's some non-union jobs you can't get a job unless you're prepared to state that you've got to work 60 hours, be prepared to work 60 hours a week.
Well, could I ask a question? Are they suggesting that you work 60 hours without living up to the Labor Standards Act, which is overtime after 40 and so on?
Nope.
Oh. Well, you know, it is a free enterprise society, and the employer, if he attaches that condition to the employment, as long as he lives up to the Labor Act, he's entitled to do that. That's not to say that we won't be also reviewing that during this process.
Yeah, it would seem unfair in times of unemployment if guys are being told you can only get this job if you work 60 hours a week.
I am led to believe that W.C. Bennett helped the unions to regulate this kind of thing years ago.
Well, there was legislation. You had to get overtime permits at one time. Do you still have to get overtime permits?
No.
You don't?
No. Well, you do after a certain number of hours,
I
but
see.
generally no.
Go ahead, please.
Well, Jack.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got some friends who are unionized ones, you know, electricians and plumbers and that, and when they want work done, you know, around their house, a friend of mine, he got a house built. He didn't go get union framers or union.
No, I know.
You know, he shopped around and he got non-union, and he's a union man. And I think there's a message here, you know, like the union people want it both ways. They want to be paid the best, but when they want to spend their money, they know what it's like to be on the management side or the owner side, and they shop around and they get the best deal.
Well, I may hurt their conscience a little bit. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Hanson. I would like to ask you two questions about the Labour Board. First, who does the Labour Board work for? Two, if you have any plan on putting a time limit, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 years, when they come down with a decision, and not let cases lie around. It's been lying around for both 5 and 10 years because it's not political at the political party's convenience to come down with a decision at that time.
Well, first of all, the Labor Relations Board draws a paycheck from the provincial government or through a branch of the provincial government, but they don't in effect work for the provincial government. They in fact are an autonomous board that make a decision based on the legislation and their best judgment of the situation at the time. Political interference in the Labor Board, as you are suggesting, is certainly not advocated nor practiced.
What do you think will happen to the unemployment rate in BC this coming year? We're just nudging 13%. It's disastrous in many parts of this province.
It is very difficult, Jack, and I see an improvement, but not a significant one.
My thanks to Lyall Hanson, your new Labour Minister. Next, we're going to talk to some truck loggers after the break. When I read Jack Kemp's white paper on the suggested drastic changes in the Forest Administration in British Columbia, I wondered if I was reading correctly, because he gives a clear impression that he's going to wipe out wasteful practices, he's going to amend unfair stumpages, he's going to stop so-called sympathetic administration of the forests and whip the big boys into shape. Well, now, these aren't big boys, but they're very important boys. The first guy, I'll go to Ian first. Ian Mahood, past president of the Truck Loggers Association of British Columbia, and Dan Hanuse, the president of the Truck Loggers Association of British Columbia. I get the impression from Kemp's stuff today, Dan, that the forests have been very badly run, and it took an ex-Jippo logger like Kemp to come out and say it in public. Do you agree with him?
Well, I would have to agree that he's on the right track, and how far it goes. It'll depend on his review.
What do you think, Mr. Mahood?
Oh, I would say the same as Dan. This has been going on so long, this sympathetic administration, which is a political syndrome that you have to help all the big guys and put the little guys out to dry or whatever. And it's about time that Mr. Kemp and I would say Mr. Vander Zalm take a look at this and get back to getting some equity, and certainly from the point of view.
But you're the guys that do the logging. Now, do you, when you're logging, indulge in wasteful practices and don't do proper cleanups and not involved in the reseeding of the land?
No, I would have to say that we live up to the requirements of the licensee, their requirements to us. If the standard of utilization has changed off and on due to markets, I suppose, then I would say, no, I think we do a good job in that respect.
All right, what does it look like for this year with the 15% added on at the border on your American exports, on the lumber exports?
The log demand and market demands are pretty strong, particularly in all sectors, and I think it's going to be a very good year. And personally, I don't really think that the countervail is going to put anybody out of work. We're a flexible industry and we can handle it. What we may get tangled up in is a lot of administration backing and filling so that they really screw the thing up instead of meeting it head on. There's too much politics.
He's telling me no loss of any jobs. The countervail doesn't really matter. We're so efficient and good. Can you go along with that? Is that the kind of year you see ahead?
Well, I certainly see world demand for lumber products or wood products is going to remain high this year. I don't think anybody can argue that. And I think that the countervailing, or the duties, because they're not countervailing duties, the duties that will be imposed and will eventually probably go on stumpage, I don't think it's going to hurt that much. And I think people that have gone on, particularly in eastern Canada, I think they have an agenda, and probably because we'll probably see a election in Ontario this year.
And you're suggesting to me that we're taking a beating from the eastern media, especially because they're trying to build up Peterson as a tough guy in Ontario?
The answer is yes.
What do you think, Ian?
Oh, I agree 100%.
Well, you made some pretty outspoken remarks. You said, and I'm just going to go right to the quote, Vander Zalm knows the issue on the 15% is not sovereignty. He defends us against the stupidity of Broadbent and Turner. What do you think of Broadbent and Turner and their attitude to what has happened?
Well, I think they're just playing politics.
You think they're stupid?
I don't, well, I guess they're playing stupid politics, put it that way.
Well, you said that Vander Zalm knows he defends British Columbians against the stupidity of Broadbent and Turner. Why are they stupid?
Because they're not really facing the real world, and the exercise is to get our industry into a modern syndrome. We have some of the most obsolete industry, any concentration, particularly in British Columbia, and the issue is to get those sort of things straightened out. It's nothing to do with sovereignty at all, and they're just talking about the wrong thing. That's what I'm trying to say. Maybe it's too strong to say they're stupid. I'm sure they're not, or they wouldn't get elected.
Well, they're politicians. You're entitled to call them stupid if you think so, but the fact remains is that what's going to happen, though, Dan, if the 15% tax as of this moment is which affects only the American market, lumber, if it's replaced by stumpage, that's going to make business tougher for the industry, is it not?
Well, I suppose so, but I think one of the things you got to remember that the price of the wood products in the world, and I guess part of the American trend to try to stop us from doing it, we've been dumping lumber products in the world, and I'm absolutely positive that lumber prices today are very, very reasonable, and any increase is not going to hurt a house which probably uses no more than 6,000 or 7,000 board feet on an average two-bedroom home. So if you put $10, $20, $30, $40 on it, it's only going to add a couple of $300 to it.
But it will also put up the prices of our products in UK and the Southeast Asia Rim and all the rest of it, whereas the 50% only applies to the American lumber at the moment.
Well, I doubt it'll put the prices up because it's the market demand and what the customer is going to pay for it will set the price. It isn't what we think we should charge for it or anything else.
All right, Ian, if you had a recipe to put the forests in order, what would you do? Have the big boys been treated far too sympathetically?
Yes, and the context of it is that they have had it so easy that, and they've invested in other parts of the world. They have not reinvested in modernizing the technology on this coast. Somebody gave a figure today, which I don't know whether it's accurate or right, but it's illustrative. To take $10 billion to put our industry back into a high technology state that we can compete, and we have been subsidizing our industry unquestionably in order to let it penetrate the U.S. market. I think that's dead wrong, and because the forest industry is a continental industry, and it's damaging to everybody in the continent that invests in it, and we should really be a competitive industry, not somebody that has to suck along on a subsidy.
Well, that's of course what the Americans have been saying about us for a long while, correct?
That's correct. They weren't wrong.
What about reforestation? Now, I know that truck loggers as such, you're not directly involved in reforestation.
No, Jack, I think there's a misconception on the coast. I think the major companies have done a good job in reforestation as far as getting the young seedlings into the ground. I don't think you can fault any of the major companies on the coast. However, where our unstocked lands lie are lands that were logged some years back, particularly on government sales, and when these forest licenses, before they were forced into having the same silvicultural restrictions on them. So I think, to be fair, I think they've done an excellent job in.
Mind you, you're all accused, and I presume this applies to you too, of high grading. Kemp is going to try and wipe out high grading, which is taking only the best timber from a stand and leaving the other stuff.
Well, he's talking about something different than that. There's a strong move afoot amongst the major timber owners to stop logging up an XYZ in and bring it all down to Souk and run for 20 years at Souk, and then if they go back to the XYZ in or not, they'll decide then. And that is economic high grading, because it's just going to create a ghost town in Souk if that's allowed, and the sustainable management is basically to spread it over all the operating units in the province.
I suppose so. We should keep tree farm licenses.
No, I think they should be amended quite seriously.
You too?
Yes, I think it should be looked at. And
you plan to you want to export all the logs you can to Japan and the Pacific?
No, I don't think so, Jack. I think the surplus criteria, or if we have logs that are not being used, sure, let's export them. But I think that our duty is to see that our mills run.
Have a good year, gentlemen. We need all the jobs you can provide. My thanks to Ian Mahood and to Dan Hanuse of the Truck Loggers Association of British Columbia. And I'll be back with something about your income tax, if you've got guts enough, after the break. You're going to meet a woman of principle. Her name is Dr. Jerilynn Prior. And she is a Quaker. Now, being a Quaker, we'll back into the story, makes you different, doesn't it?
I think I became a Quaker because of the way I looked at things and the way I believed. So it's a hard, I was brought up a proper Baptist, so I became a Quaker.
And being a Quaker, you therefore become a conscientious objector to all what? Violence?
Basically, violence is a way of getting power over somebody or solving problems.
Yeah, and you want none of that whatsoever. And now you're telling me that if I had your beliefs, I would be prepared, like you, if necessary, to go to jail to fight against the use of my taxes for war materials. Is that correct?
I hope so.
Tell me your story and how this grew to it. When you first decided to exert on the bills that you pay, your conscientious beliefs that it's your duty not to support financially things which you abhor.
Hard to say where it began, but basically the message that I got from my parents was clearly that people were valuable and violence wasn't a right way of doing things. My father was a conscientious objector in World War II. So that came out of a Baptist tradition at that time. The first time I really stood on the line was when the telephone tax, this was in Boston when I was a medical student, the telephone tax was reenacted to pay for the Vietnam War. And I simply did not pay for that portion of the tax when I paid my telephone bill. So beginning then, with the exception of a few years when I first came to Canada, I have been very clear about not wanting to pay any taxes which go for military purposes.
So since 1982, how did you decide what percentage of your taxes you would withhold?
Okay. The federal government, the budget, clearly states that which is for various segments of the military in Canada. We carefully excluded the support of veterans, for instance. That's not a violent thing to do, to support someone who's gone to war for you. And that's published. It was put together for me by a group called Conscience Canada. It actually came out of a committee from the Quaker meeting in Victoria, British Columbia. And that same group, Conscience Canada, started a peace trust fund in 1982. So I was able to pay the portion of taxes which the government would use for war into that trust fund.
And deducted it from your income tax?
Yes.
Would that be about what percent?
10.5, I think it was that year.
10.5%. And as you prepared your tax return, did you show that clearly on your tax
Yes, I
return?
did. Yes, I did.
Did they pick you up right away that year?
Yes.
And the next year?
Yes.
And the next year?
Mm-hmm.
So how much in all, said he, the old repertorial instinct, have you actually deducted? Oh, I can't ask
I
you
don't
that.
know. I don't know the exact amount, but it's varied between 12 and 9% of the budget in the last several years has been.
And all of this money, are there many of your thinking who are contributing to Conscience Canada?
Mm-hmm. There are approximately 315 or probably more as of this year.
Any idea how much is in the kitty?
Someone said in the 300 to 400,000 range that's in the trust account. Yes.
That's good. Now, when did the government take you to court?
Well, what happens is if you object to the assessment on your tax, then you write a notice of objection, and then you get a response. My response was that it was on the basis of conscience and religion, and they said, I'm sorry, that is not a provision for that in the tax law. Therefore, I said I wish to appeal that to the tax court, and so I sat the next federal tax hearing in Vancouver.
And you lost the case there?
That's right.
You're planning to appeal it further?
Yes.
Meanwhile, have they dove into your bank account with garnishee orders to get the money?
Under any rate, previously they insisted on a promissory note at the bank saying that I was good for the amount of money. And so I went through, it was like a loan. At present, they are not pushing me while there's litigation, while the thing is in process.
So they'll leave it, and then eventually they can use their draconian powers if you lose in the federal court.
Mm-hmm. The interest accrues.
What is your own personal plan of action if you are finally sentenced for this disobedience to the proper laws of a democracy?
I don't think I can conscientiously, voluntarily pay that money. I simply wouldn't be true to who I am and what I believe. So there are several options. They can take it out of the salary. They could take it out of bank accounts. They could seize things that I own, or they could throw me in prison.
For non-payment of the debt?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's really quite tough. But what about, it's easy for me to be emotionally sympathetic to you and say, well, of course, I saw a bumper sticker today which said, we already have the possibility of a nuclear war. No, we're already risking nuclear war. Why can't we risk nuclear disarmament?
That's right.
But then I'll go along and I'll pay my income tax because as most people will do.
Mm-hmm. I think I understand that. In fact, I don't quite understand why it is that I can't. I feel so strongly about it that I can't.
Mm-hmm. But then again,
I sympathize and I completely understand someone who says, I want to work for peace, but that's something I can't do. Mm-hmm. I can't myself do what you're doing, and I understand that.
Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, think of the dogs, think of the complications if I'd suddenly decide I am anti-abortion. I'm therefore going to deduct X percentage of the health costs because I will not pay for that. Or I'm anti this or I'm anti that, and just take little bits and pieces off.
I understand.
The place would become an administrative nightmare, wouldn't it?
I understand that. And that's a difficult problem. What I think that we have to do is there's got to be some way in which a person can clearly say this is an essential belief. And beyond this point, I can't go further. And if somebody feels that strongly about abortion or about receiving blood products or about something else, then I think they have to stand, just as I have.
Well, you make your case well and strongly, and you shall be now in the news, whether you like it or not, every time a crisis appears for Dr. Jerilynn Prior, Quaker and a doctor, and we're going to see what you think of her and her actions immediately after the break. This is Dr. Jerilynn Prior, Quaker, who will not pay to the government what she believes and what what's the name of your organization again?
Conscience Canada?
Believes is the share that goes to military purposes, not just nuclear war.
No.
All forms of military expenditure. Go ahead to Dr. Prior, please.
Thank you. Dr. Prior is living in Canada, and which is governed by the law of the land. If she feels that strongly about not contributing to taxes, as we all must pay, she should pay her taxes and then do her conscientious objecting in some other manner. But to take it upon herself and brainwash another 300 people to say, I won't pay for whatever reason, I think is just terrible. Now I'm going to hang up.
There you are.
She didn't want an answer?
Oh, yes, she wants an answer.
Okay.
She thinks you're terrible.
Yeah, I heard that.
Go ahead. Oh, just a minute. You carry on.
I was going to say that I think it's important to say I'm not getting out of paying taxes. I'm paying those taxes into a trust fund, asking the federal government to assure me that they'll use those monies for non-military purposes. So I have paid every cent that I calculated I owed. It's just that I'm holding them in trust.
But the government can't take the 300,000 in trust or whatever it is and say, well, this money we will spend on non-military matters.
Why not?
Well, they'll spend more of my taxes on military matters. Well, that's a cop-out.
Does that bother you?
No, but that's a cop-out for you, is it not? I mean, if they take my taxes and spend twice out of my taxes on military matters and use yours for medical supplies, no object has been achieved.
What about using that money for learning more about disarmament? What about using it for learning more about negotiation? What about using it for an international effort to stop this incredible escalation toward nuclear annihilation?
If Joe Clark were here, he would say, we have financed the Canadian Peace Research Institute, we have financed all kinds of worthwhile people out of general tax monies. However, let's go to another call. Go ahead, please.
Yes, a number of points on this. I would think that if the good doctor wishes to dictate where the dollars are spent, she should run for office and do it that way. I have a couple of three items have come up while I've been listening to her. In British Columbia now, part of the parochial or private schools are partially, I think 30%, 33% or something, financed by public funds. As I suppose, a secular, or at least a non-terribly religious person, following the doctor's dictates, that would seem to me that I should resent paying a certain percentage of my taxes because it's going to the provincial government, which in turn is giving it to those darned private schools out there that don't think the way I think.
Okay, that's one point.
That's one. Secondly, if we follow this, somebody without any children in school, this is not exactly a quantum leap. It's a leap from her position, but why do they pay taxes to that?
Okay, got that point too.
And the third one. Since my family is all laboring folk, why should we pay for people to go through medical school? And believe me, we do, notwithstanding the tremendous tuition fees and the terrible education in British Columbia. And maybe that's what's given cause to this argument. I don't know. And finally, would I be justified, because I don't believe that we should have diplomatic relations per se with the Soviet Union, should I find out how much the embassy or trade commission or whatever we have in Moscow costs and correlate that to the percentage of taxes and say I'm not going to pay that? I mean, I'd be running out of trust funds, for goodness sakes.
Okay.
And I think that
here she comes.
Your point is well taken. What I'm trying to do is not a political action. I can perfectly well petition, write letters, call my MP, do the political action things. I could run for office. That is not the point. This is basically what I'm saying is that it's a conscientious thing. It's a personal belief. I don't want to change the tax system. I'm not trying to dictate in general what's done with funds. It just says that my conscience doesn't allow me to do that.
This is based on thou shalt not kill.
But a dollar is a dollar, as you pointed out, Mr. Webster, in different terms. It's a cop-out to say use the funds for something else.
Yeah,
but a dollar is a symbol, isn't it? I mean, a dollar isn't worth anything by itself.
Well, that's about all it's worth now, a symbol, yeah.
I mean, we're talking about
thank
symbols.
you. You're not getting much support so far. Mind you, there aren't many of you around, are there? Go ahead, please.
Well, I don't think it's fair. She's not getting much support. Many of us can't get through in your lines. I'd like to say that it's been said, and I think you'd agree, Jack, that war is hell. I personally admire Dr. Prior's protest on the conscience and her personal beliefs. If those of us who profess various religions even took, more of what the people claim to believe more close to heart, she'd have an awful lot more people on her side.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, go on. Oh, I cut him off too early. He'll be mad at me. Go ahead, please.
Yes. I would like, now, we do not believe in war either, but however, if an aggressive country decides to attack us, are we supposed to sit here defenseless?
That's a little bit off of the point that I'm trying to make right now.
Well, I don't think so, because you're saying that we shouldn't pay money for self-defense.
No, I didn't say I was against defense, but there are all kinds of means of defense which are not violent. And I think we know very little about them. I mean, we're at a point in human history when we need to get beyond the sort of, you do something I don't like, we hit you over the head. That's cave person kind of mentality. I think it's very hard to do violence against someone who has self-respect and who respects the person who's trying to do violence against them.
I agree with you.
Very, very hard. It's also very hard for a country that feels close ties with another country to consider that country an enemy. And I think that defense becomes necessary when those barriers go up between people or between countries. Those barriers can be broken down. And I personally think that those are more effective ways of defense.
Good, thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, to the kind doctor.
Yes.
Many people were conscripted in the last war, myself included, to defend the country. And if we didn't perform as a serviceman, we'd go to jail. And all my congratulations to you, because I hope you do go to jail for your protest, because I don't think you got a leg to stand on. You were living in a country that I helped to defend, and it was by the law of this land. And you should adhere to it too. I'll listen to your comment.
Thank you.
Do you really want me to respond, or you just feel angry? I'm glad that you did what you felt was right. I'm saying that I'm willing to serve my country in time of war. It's just that I will not serve them in a violent way.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I heard you say there was lots of ways to defend yourself from aggression other than violence, and one of the things you pointed out was that it's difficult to commit violent crimes against decent people and that sort of thing. Well, given that view, how do you explain the atrocities that have occurred in wars? How do you explain women being raped? How do you explain battered children and so forth? I mean, it's clearly there's lots of evidence out there that there's defenseless people and that there's brutal people out there who think nothing of brutalizing. And if we took away had no armed forces here, what do you propose to do if just, say, a gang of 2,000 mercenaries decided to take over British Columbia? I'll wait for your response.
Basically, we're talking about a society that's grown up on violence. War is part of our culture. If you look at television, if you look at the way...
Answering the question.
I am answering the question. I'm saying that you don't even have the imagination to think about another way.
Society,
just a minute.
1,000 years in the future.
Why is someone defenseless? Because they've learned to not feel strong themselves. Learning to respect yourself and feel strong in yourself is the first defense. And I'm not denying the fact that there are defenseless people and that there are terrible, violent, awful things that happen. I'm saying that should be the exception rather than the rule. And if we persist in thinking we can solve national and international problems by violent means, how can we help but expect that violence will happen in our neighborhoods.
Fair enough, sir. Thanks very much. He's making the basic point, of course, that every society must in some way be organized for self-defense with the means of killing if necessary.
That's been the tradition.
Do you think it could be
doesn't
changed?
work now.
No, I must admit it's not working very well. Go ahead from Victoria.
Oh yes, Jack. I'd like to someone to tell me if all this stuff I've been hearing for years and years is that the Homo sapien feels aggression, exudes aggression at different times depending on the stimuli. Now I wonder how the young lady would defend against that. Is everyone supposed to be totally passive? Would you ask the young lady if she's ever made love to a totally passive person and ask her if she would enjoy that?
Well, that's not a relevant question.
I'm certainly not very passive.
No.
And I didn't say anything about being passive. It reminds me of the very real situation that I was in, where I was all by myself in the wilderness being literally attacked by a bear. And my response to that bear was initially just shock and startle. And I hollered or something, hey, and the bear stopped its sort of charge at me about 10 feet away. And then I got very angry. Bear, you're not behaving properly. I'm not proper food. And I glared at that bear. And I basically said, look, I refuse to be a victim. And I'll be darned if that bear didn't sort of duck its head, I'm serious, tucked its head and turned away. And it was springtime and he was hungry and I would have made very good food. The point is, I was not frightened of that bear. I was angry. The bear was not behaving up to my standards.
But you wouldn't try that again if you had to.
I would, because that was the best defense I had.
I think you were just damn very lucky indeed that night.
But that's not passive.
No, it's not passive. Next time I see a bear, I'll put my arm down its throat, catch its tail, pull it inside out, and it'll run the other way.
Good for you.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack, all I would like to say is, having lived in England as a child through the war, I wonder if she realizes that so many thousands and millions of people gave their lives in the last two wars simply for the fact that she's able to sit in that chair now and talk the way she is. Nobody wants more, but there you go. You've got to have it at times to get rid of the idiots and the monsters. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, ma'am. That's not a nonsensible thing, because Hitler had to be stopped, even before nuclear war.
I understand.
And if he hadn't been stopped, we'd be a terrified nation of slaves today. But anyway, I admire you. Conscience Canada, and this is Dr. Jerilynn Prior, and your next step is an appeal to the federal court, am I correct?
That's correct.
Well, we'll see how you get on next time around. I
Thank
hope you
you.
don't go to jail. I hope they just seize your money if they have to.
Thank you.
And I shall be back after the break. Marjorie Nichols is leaving town to go to work in Ottawa. What a pity. She'll be here tomorrow night, but ahead of her will be none other than Premier William van der Zam, the guy who runs this province, if anybody's running this province at the moment. Bill van der Zam and Marjorie Nichols separately tomorrow night, 5 p.m. Stay tuned for Tony.